You ever notice how the quietest corners of your life are sometimes the ones that hold you together? My name is Callahan, and for most of my 37 years, I thought I was meant to live in the shadows. Just another single mom in a seaside town where everyone seems to know what success should look like. Most evenings after the dinner dishes are done and the soft hush of the ocean drifts in through the window, I find myself sitting at the edge of my old kitchen table with a cup of tea watching my son Noah trace galaxies in his notebook. That's our ritual, the world on pause, just the two of us charting constellations only we can see. They say every family has a golden child and a gray one. For us, that was my younger sister Rachel and me. Rachel sparkled honor roll dance recitals, the first to leave home and the first to come back with a fancy degree. Our mother Linda saw her as the future. She saw me as the reliable one, the backdrop, the person who would keep things running when the spotlight faded. I learned early how to blend in, how to become the calm in everyone else's storm. But if you ask me what I wanted, I'm not sure I ever knew how to answer. Sometimes when Noah is asleep and the world feels still enough to breathe, I remember what it was like to be a kid myself. Back then, my father was the only one who seemed to see me not just for the grades I brought home or the chores I finished, but for the quiet questions I asked and the dreams I barely dared to share. When he died, something shifted in our family. The air got colder, the walls closed in. Suddenly, I was the anchor nobody noticed, holding everything steady, while Rachel became the sun everyone orbited around. I never blamed her. How can you resent someone for being loved? But it did something to me. I learned how to disappear in plain sight, how to make myself useful, invisible, necessary. And yet, even in the deepest shadow, there were moments of light. Moments like this, watching Noah draw rocket ships, and wishing just once that someone would ask about my dreams too. This isn't the story of a woman who wanted revenge. It's not a tale of breaking free in one dramatic night or finding happiness at the end of some glittering rainbow. No, this is the story of quiet strength, of what happens when a lifetime of small hurts pushes you to finally choose yourself. It's about the family you're born into, the wounds you carry, and the courage it takes to build something new from the pieces everyone else overlooked. Maybe you'll find a piece of yourself here, especially if you've ever felt invisible in your own home, or if you're still waiting for someone to see you for who you really are. If so, I hope you'll stay with me, because this story isn't just mine. It belongs to anyone who's ever wondered if being enough is possible, and I promise before this hour is over, you'll know that you are. You ever walk into a room, maybe your own kitchen, maybe your mother's house, and feel smaller just for being yourself? That was my normal long before I had words for it. I grew up in a sea-weathered house in Portland, Maine, where the salt from the ocean left a film on the window glass, and the wind seemed to carry the memories of everyone who'd ever lived there. My mother Linda believed in hard work and high standards. She had a place for everything and everyone, especially for my younger sister Rachel, the one she called her sunbeam. For me, she saved the word steady, like I was a table that wouldn't wobble but was never meant to shine. Even as a child, I learned how to fade into the quiet corners. At birthday parties, Rachel would twirl in a brand new dress surrounded by cameras and a chorus of grown-up voices praising her perfect smile. I'd be the one refilling juice cups, checking if the candles were blown out, making sure no one spilled on the rug. I never thought much of it back then. After all, someone had to keep things moving. But deep down, I started to wonder what it would feel like if just once someone saw me as more than the responsible one. If someone clapped for me the way they clapped for her. Our family had an unspoken script. Rachel was the one who dazzled. She collected trophies, scholarships, and first-place ribbons like seashells. I was the one who made sure everyone got to school on time, who helped Mom with the shopping list, who learned to cook when Dad's health started to fail. I got good at doing what was needed, even if it meant no one really noticed I was there. Some nights, I'd sit at the top of the stairs after everyone else was asleep, listening to the foghorns on the bay and wondering if being useful was all I'd ever be. I remember one winter Rachel had just won her 5th grade spelling bee. Mom organized a party called the Neighbors, even baked a cake shaped like a dictionary. My own science fair project, a solar system made from painted marbles and wire hangers, barely made it to the fridge door. It was a good project. But when Mom caught me lingering near the kitchen, she only said Rachel worked so hard, let her have her moment. So I learned to shrink myself, to take up less space, to clap quietly from the wings. You'd think this would make me bitter, but most days, it just made me tired. Tired of always being the other one, tired of feeling like the background music to someone else's highlight reel. But if you asked me what I was really afraid of, it wasn't being overlooked, it was that maybe deep down I wasn't worth noticing at all. It's funny how family shapes those little voices in our heads, the ones that whisper, don't ask for too much, or don't make a scene. I carried those whispers with me everywhere, into every classroom, every job, every friendship, even into motherhood. When I had Noah, everything shifted in ways I couldn't explain. Suddenly, I wasn't just background anymore. I was the whole story for someone, a story that started and ended with love even on the hardest days. Noah came into the world small and fierce with a cry like a gull in the wind. I promised myself right there in the delivery room that he'd never feel like he had to earn his place in the world. He'd always know that being himself was enough. But old habits don't die quietly. There were nights I'd tuck him in, watch him drift off, and feel that familiar ache of invisibility creeping back in. I'd wonder if I was doing enough, if he needed a mother who could shine brighter, laugh louder, push harder. Then just as I'd start to spiral, Noah would wake up at dawn and run to the window, pointing at the clouds, asking if they looked like dragons or rocket ships. In those moments, I remembered sometimes being steady is its own kind of magic. There's a lesson in all this if you look close enough. The world needs the quiet ones, the steady hands, the people who show up even when the spotlight isn't theirs. Sometimes the best kinds of strength are the ones that don't announce themselves. The hands that hold the arms, that catch the hearts, that stay open even when they're tired. I didn't know it back then, but every time I set the table, or swept the floor, or stayed late to help a friend, I was learning how to be the kind of parent and the kind of person who could make someone else feel seen. Still, the ache of being overlooked didn't just vanish because I became a mother. If anything, it echoed louder, especially at family gatherings. My mother's house was filled with reminders of Rachel's triumphs, framed diplomas, glossy wedding photos, newspaper clippings about her dental practice. My photos were tucked behind a potted plant in the hallway, or slipped between stacks of old mail. At first, I'd look for them hopeful. After a while, I stopped searching. I told myself I didn't need that kind of validation. But the truth is, we all want to be seen. We all want to matter. So I started to carve out my own spaces, places where I could breathe, where I could remember who I was before the world told me who I should be. Sometimes it was as simple as a walk along the shore, the cold salt air stinging my cheeks, the roar of the waves drowning out all the noise. Other times it was sitting in a library losing myself in stories, where quiet girls turned out to be heroes. I made a promise for Noah I would be both anchor and lighthouse, steady enough to hold him safe, bright enough to help him find his way home. If there's a truth I wish I'd learned sooner, it's this. You don't have to burn the brightest to warm the hearts of the people who matter. Sometimes showing up quietly is the most radical act of all. It took me years to see the beauty in being the steady one, to understand that there's power in persistence, in kindness, in showing up for others, even when it goes unseen. But even as I tried to embrace that lesson, life had other plans. Because sometimes, no matter how much you try to keep the peace, the world finds ways to test your quiet strength. For me, that test arrived on a chilly March afternoon with a white envelope pressed through the mail slot, a formal invitation in my mother's elegant script summoning me to Rachel's engagement party. I held it in my hands for a long time, heart pounding, knowing this was more than just another family gathering. It was the start of something I couldn't yet name, a turning point I'd been walking toward all my life. And that's where the real story begins. There's a strange magic in how families draw their lines. In our house, those lines were painted early and painted bold. Rachel, the golden child, and me, the reliable shadow just outside the frame. If you've ever been cast in a family role you never auditioned for, you'll know what I mean. It wasn't that Rachel asked for the spotlight. She was just born shining, the kind of girl who drew smiles from strangers, who seemed to glide through every door that ever opened for her. From her first ballet recital to her valedictorian speech, Mom was always there, front row phone, held high eyes, glistening with pride. I remember sitting in the same church pews a year after Rachel's graduation for my own college commencement. The day was gray and blustery, the kind of Maine spring that feels more like winter hanging on for dear life. I searched the crowd for my mother's face, but she arrived late still in her work uniform, holding a coffee that steamed in the cold. She hugged me brisk and distracted, then hurried off for Rachel's dental school interview. I watched her leave, the wind tangling her hair, and felt the old ache settle in my chest. The quiet confirmation that some celebrations just don't make the family calendar. Our roles only sharpened as we grew older. Rachel's mistakes were called learning opportunities, swept away with a laugh or a hand on her shoulder. If I messed up even a little, there'd be a list of questions, a silent treatment, a gentle reminder that you should know better, Grace. Once in high school, I lost a library book. The late fees were small, but Mom made me pay for it with my own babysitting money, repeating Rachel would never be so careless. I learned to be careful. I learned to be cautious. I learned not to ask for help because in our family, the golden child got rescued while the gray sister was expected to swim. Maybe you're nodding along because you know how this feels. Maybe you were the responsible one, the fixer, the peacemaker. Or maybe you were the favorite, and you never quite knew what to do with all that attention. Family systems have a way of freezing us in place. I read once that these roles aren't chosen, they're assigned sometimes before we even know who we are. The golden child often feels the pressure to be perfect, while the overlooked child learns to expect less, to dream smaller, to shrink their hopes to fit the spaces left behind. Rachel and I never fought the way some sisters do. Ours was a distance made of politeness, of boundaries we never questioned aloud. At holiday dinners, Rachel would regale us with stories from her dental practice, her latest charity project, her high-powered fiancé's achievements. Mom would beam, asking for every detail while I refilled water glasses and made sure the rolls didn't burn. Sometimes I'd try to contribute a story about Noah's latest school project, or a funny thing that happened at work, but the conversation would drift back to Rachel, gentle as a tide pulling everything toward its moon. I don't blame her, not really. Rachel had her own burdens. Being the family's pride and joy came with invisible chains, pressure to never slip, to always look put together, to keep up the performance for the world. There were nights when I heard her crying through the thin bedroom walls, sobbing over a lost friendship or a bad grade. But when morning came, she was perfect again, mascara on, smile flawless, ready to be whatever Mom needed her to be. Still, the wait was never even. Once Rachel failed her driver's test. Mom bought her ice cream and drove her home, whispering, "You'll get it next time, darling." When I forgot to sign up for the SAT on time, Mom didn't speak to me for days. That summer, I spent my free time tutoring Rachel for her retake, quizzing her on vocabulary, running practice essays, late into the humid Maine nights. She passed, of course, and the house erupted in joy. No one thanked me, but I watched her drive off for her first solo trip and felt a bittersweet pride, a secret silent win that belonged only to me. If there's a lesson tucked in these memories, it's this. Families can be complicated, and sometimes love gets tangled up with expectations and unspoken rules. It took me a long time to realize that my value wasn't measured in how brightly I shined, or how smoothly I kept things running for everyone else. I started to notice that the world is full of people who have lived in someone else's shadow. Sometimes the only way out is to step into the light you make for yourself. As Noah grew, I watched for these patterns in my own parenting. I made mistakes, of course, no parent gets it right every time. But I tried to let him know that being the best didn't matter to me, being real did. When he brought home a B on a math test and hung his head in shame, I asked him what he'd learned, not what he'd lost. When he won a prize at the science fair, I cheered just as loudly as when he tried and failed to build a volcano that exploded in the backyard. I wanted him to know that his story was enough, that he was enough whether or not the world applauded. There's a freedom in letting go of the old blueprints, in refusing to let someone else's expectations decide the shape of your days. I didn't figure this out all at once. I still flinched when my mother sighed at my choices, or when Rachel's accomplishments filled my newsfeed. But I found that the more I celebrated my own quiet wins, the less I needed anyone else to notice. I started to make space for myself, space for new dreams, new friendships, and even the possibility of being loved for exactly who I was. Of course, the old patterns don't let go easily. As Rachel's engagement approached and the invitations went out, I felt the old anxieties stirring, the urge to shrink, to disappear, to make things easier for everyone but myself. But this time, something was different. I had Noah's gentle wisdom, my own hard-won resilience, and the memory of 1,000 small ways I'd learned to matter if only to myself. And so, as I held the invitation to Rachel's party in my hand, I realized I was standing at a crossroads. I could keep playing my part, or I could finally step off the stage and see what else life had to offer. I didn't know what would come next, but I knew at last that I was ready to find out. Some losses echo in a family long after the casseroles have cooled and the neighbors stop calling. My father's passing was like that, a quiet earthquake, whose aftershocks rearranged the very shape of our home. I was 16 when his heart gave out on a rain-slick October morning, just weeks before Rachel's first big dance recital. Even now I remember the way the world seemed to fall silent, how even the ocean outside paused its wild song for a few stunned hours. Dad was the buffer in our family, the one who could soften Mom's sharpness, the only person who never looked right through me. In those early days, people came with sympathy cards and stories about what a good man he was. But grief is a lonely road, and when the funeral ended, we each wandered down it alone. Mom retreated into busyness, clinging tighter to her routines and to Rachel, as if perfection could keep sorrow at bay. For me, the loss felt heavier. Dad had always made time for little things, walks on the rocky shore, late-night talks about the stars, reminders that being different was something to cherish, not hide. Without him, the air in our house changed thicker, heavier, like there wasn't quite enough oxygen for us all. Rachel mourned in her own way. She stopped dancing for a while, her laughter quieter, her steps less certain. Sometimes I'd find her curled up with Dad's old flannel shirt staring into the blue Maine dusk. But soon enough she snapped back, driven by Mom's belief that achievement could mend any wound. Recitals resumed, test scores soared. At home, the empty chair at the dinner table became just another piece of furniture, something to dust, never to mention. Mom kept moving forward as if to stop was to risk falling apart. I didn't have that luxury. In the silence that followed Dad's absence, I became the family anchor, the steady hand, the voice that soothed the one who kept the wheels turning. There were bills to pay, groceries, to buy, little things to remember that Mom couldn't bring herself to face. I learned to write checks, balance budgets, and carry grief in quiet ways that didn't make a mess. If I missed Dad, I did it after midnight, staring at the constellations he once taught me to name, wishing for just one more story, one more soft word of encouragement. Loss shapes you sometimes in ways you don't notice until years have gone by. I grew up believing my job was to keep things steady, never complain, never cry, never rock the boat. I envied Rachel her ability to weep openly, to demand comfort, to be the one everyone gathered around. But as time passed, I realized she carried her own kind of sorrow, a fear that if she ever stopped shining, the whole house might go dark. We were both doing what we could to survive in the only ways we knew. I remember one night, maybe a year after Dad died, when Noah was just a baby. He woke up screaming, feverish and scared. I rocked him for hours, humming the same lullabies Dad used to sing to me. As I watched the dawn break through our little apartment window, I understood for the first time the shape of Dad's love, a kind of steadfastness that didn't need applause, that kept showing up even when no one noticed. I promised Noah then that I'd be that anchor for him, even if the world never gave me a gold star for trying. Looking back, I see now how loss built the foundation for everything that followed. It taught me that life is both fragile and fierce, that you can break and mend 100 times, and still find a way to rise each morning. It's the invisible lessons that last, the patience to listen, the willingness to stay, the courage to keep loving even when the people you love are gone. My father gave me all that, not in lectures, but in the gentle way he made everyone feel seen. When he left, I carried those gifts forward, even when it hurt. Families don't always talk about their wounds. Ours certainly didn't. There were no therapy sessions, no heart-to-hearts over mugs of tea. We each built our own armor, hoping it would be enough to keep the world from hurting us again. For Rachel, that meant chasing excellence. For Mom, it meant control over herself, over us, over anything that felt uncertain. For me, it meant quietly filling the gaps, making sure no one else ever felt the sting of being left behind. But here's the thing, grief doesn't disappear just because you ignore it. It waits in the silent spaces between words at the dinner table, in the ache of old photos, in the way you flinch when someone says Dad. I learned that the hard way when years later I found myself repeating old patterns, pushing aside my pain, always reaching for steadiness even if it meant burying my own needs. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's that everyone in a family suffers in their own way, and that suffering left unspoken can twist itself into the very bones of your life. The real work, I think, is finding the courage to break the silence, to grieve out loud, to ask for help, to admit that even anchors need a place to rest. Now when Noah asks about his grandfather, I tell him the truth. I tell him about the man who taught me how to spot Orion's belt, who baked bread on Sundays, who never left a room without making sure everyone knew they mattered. I want Noah to know that love outlives the people who gave it. I want him to understand that being steady isn't about never feeling pain. It's about holding space for it, letting it move through you, and then making something gentle out of what remains. So as I prepared to face Rachel's engagement party, invitation in hand and heart pounding with old aches, I carried all of this with me. I carried my father's memory, my own hard-earned resilience, and the quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, there was still room for something new to grow in the spaces he left behind. And that hope, fragile as it was, became the compass that pointed me toward what came next. Some letters arrive with more than just words inside. They carry memories, expectations, and the weight of all the years that came before. When I found the envelope from my mother waiting on the worn welcome mat of my apartment, I knew before I opened it what it would be. Her handwriting, careful and tight, spelled out my name as if by including me, she could also contain me. Rachel's engagement party. A celebration, a gathering, and I couldn't help but feel a test I'd never been able to pass. I turned the envelope over in my hands for a long time before opening it. It wasn't the first family invitation I'd ever dreaded, but it felt different, sharper somehow. Maybe it was the thought of facing another crowd of relatives and friends who'd remember me as the responsible sister, the single mother, the one who'd never quite measured up. Or maybe it was the fear that Noah would see with fresh young eyes how easy it was to be made small in a room full of people who were supposed to love you best. That night, as Noah and I ate takeout at the kitchen table, he looked up from his carton of noodles and asked, "Will Aunt Rachel be happy to see us?" I hesitated, remembering birthdays and holidays, past how Rachel would give him a polite smile, an absent-minded pat on the head, then move on to greet her real audience. I wanted to protect him from the quiet sting of being an afterthought, but I also wanted to be honest. "I think she'll be busy," I finally said. "Big parties make people distracted. But we'll be together, and that's what matters." He nodded, accepting my answer with a trust I didn't always feel I deserved. Preparing for the party became a kind of ritual. I ironed Noah's only dress shirt, bought a new pair of shoes that pinched at the toes, and practiced small talk in the bathroom mirror. All the while, I felt the old anxiety growing like a tide, rising in my chest, threatening to pull me under. I remembered every gathering where my voice faded out beneath Rachel's laughter, every compliment she received that skimmed past me every time Mom adjusted my collar or my posture or my expectations, just so I'd better blend into the background. Family gatherings in our town had their own rules, a choreography of smiles and questions, gentle jabs, and inside jokes that circled the table like clockwork. There was always someone asking about Rachel's practice, Rachel's fiancé, Rachel's latest marathon or charity fundraiser, my updates about Noah's spelling test, or the funny thing that happened at work would be met with polite nods and quickly forgotten. I started to wonder if I was partly to blame, if all those years of fading quietly made me invisible even to myself. But I also remembered small, brave moments. The year I organized the school's book drive and filled the library with donated stories for kids who'd never owned a book before. The night Noah had a fever, and I sat up with him telling stories until sunrise. The mornings I woke early to run along the waterfront, breathing in the salty air and reminding myself I was real, I was here, I was enough. Maybe those moments didn't make headlines or earn applause, but they were mine, and they mattered. As the day of the party approached, I tried to remind myself that old wounds could be reopened, but they could also be healed. I looked for small signs of hope, a neighbor dropping off extra muffins, a thank you note from a client, Noah's hand slipping into mine as we crossed the street. I found comfort in the rituals we'd made together, Saturday pancakes, Sunday library visits, evenings curled up with a movie and popcorn. Our little family was built on these quiet joys, and I held on to them as tightly as I could. There's a lesson, I think, in the way we brace ourselves for old pain. Sometimes we walk straight into the places that hurt us, hoping this time will be different. Sometimes we do it because we want our children to see us stand tall, to know we belong wherever we choose to be. I realized, as I zipped up my dress and brushed Noah's hair, that I wasn't just attending this party for Rachel or for Mom, or even for myself. I was going for Noah to show him that we were worthy of being seen, no matter how anyone else tried to write our story. That morning, as we drove across town to the big white house where I'd spent so many childhood weekends, I felt both stronger and more fragile than I'd ever been. The familiar streets were lined with blooming cherry trees, their petals scattering in the breeze like confetti. Noah hummed softly beside me, his sneakers swinging above the car mat, already imagining what desserts might be on the buffet table. I gripped the steering wheel, heart thumping, and whispered a silent promise. No matter what happened, I would not disappear. We pulled up to the curb, and I took a deep breath, steadying myself as we walked toward the house. The porch was crowded with laughter and the clinking of glasses, Rachel's voice ringing out from somewhere inside. Mom opened the door with her usual careful grace, giving us each a once-over before ushering us into the glow of old wallpaper and polished floors. Noah reached for my hand, and I squeezed it, grateful for his quiet, grounding presence. As we stepped into the living room, I caught sight of Rachel in a whirlwind of well-wishers, her smile dazzling, her hair perfectly arranged, her arm linked through her fiancé's. She glanced my way, her eyes flickering, with something I couldn't quite read. There was no grand reunion, no warm embrace, just a nod, a half smile, and then the tide of guests swept her away. I watched her go, feeling the familiar ache, but also something new, a flicker of defiance, a sense that perhaps the script didn't have to stay the same forever. Standing on the edge of that crowd, I realized that coming here wasn't just about facing the past. It was about opening myself to whatever came next, trusting that the person I'd become, the mother, the anchor, the quiet fighter, was strong enough to write a new chapter. Whatever the night held, I knew one thing for certain: old wounds might reopen, but hope once found could always grow stronger in their place. And so, with Noah by my side and my heart a little lighter, I stepped further into the noise and the light, ready finally to see what happened when I refused to fade away. The first thing you notice at family parties isn't always the decorations or the menu, it's the pecking order, as familiar as the pattern on your childhood rug. The living room was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, stories that spun around Rachel like a constellation. I hovered by the coat rack, Noah at my side, letting the rhythm of the evening swirl around us. My mother bustled about, checking details with military precision, her attention darting from guest to guest, but never landing long on me. It's strange how invisible you can feel in a house where you know every creaky floorboard. I tried to smile, tried to catch up with distant cousins and Rachel's friends, but most of the conversation was a dance I didn't know the steps to. Rachel, that her new office, her fiancé's promotion, the honeymoon in Santorini. I nodded and filled plates, helped an elderly aunt to her seat, tied Noah's shoelace when he tripped in the hallway. If anyone noticed the effort, it was drowned out by another toast to Rachel's bright future. Noah, bless him, never seemed to mind. He found the other kids negotiated for extra dessert and delighted in showing off a magic trick with a bent spoon. I watched from a distance, half proud and half anxious, that even he would start to feel the subtle chill that came from not being the one the room revolved around. But kids are resilient. He found joy wherever he went, and seeing him laugh gave me the courage to keep my head high even when my feet wanted to run. It was just after dinner, with everyone gathered in the long dining room, that the night's true test arrived. Rachel stood to speak her glass, raised her voice sure and warm as she thanked everyone for sharing in her happiness. I watched her, the way her words brought smiles and tears, the way she seemed to fit so perfectly into the role she'd been handed. My mother's eyes never left her, a glow of pride softening her usual sharpness. For a moment I felt the old ache, the longing to be seen, to matter. Then Rachel's fiancé, Daniel, took the floor. He was tall and confident, the kind of man who shook every hand and remembered every name. But when he glanced at me, something flickered, hesitation maybe, or curiosity. During his speech he paused. I know I'm marrying into a family that's already given me so much, But what you may not know is that one of my earliest memories of this family is meeting Grace, volunteering at the hospital, reading stories to kids when my little sister was ill. She made those days brighter for my family, and I've never forgotten it. A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me. For a heartbeat, I wanted to shrink to disappear into the woodwork. But then I caught Noah's gaze open, trusting, proud. I forced a smile, nodding politely, heart pounding. Daniel went on weaving his story back to Rachel, but the moment lingered, hanging in the air like a secret finally spoken aloud. For the first time all night, I felt the weight of being seen not just as the background, but as a person whose kindness had left a mark. That small moment changed everything. It was as if the room shifted a few degrees, as if people saw me in sharper focus. Rachel, caught off guard, stumbled in her thanks, quickly regaining her composure, but shooting me a glance I couldn't read. My mother sat very still, hands folded tight in her lap, her smile wavering. For the rest of the evening, a subtle tension threaded through the conversations, a silent acknowledgement that maybe the old script didn't fit as perfectly as it used to. Looking back, I realize how powerful a single story can be. All those years of feeling invisible, of thinking nothing I did mattered, and yet that one act of compassion for a child in pain had rippled out in ways I never saw coming. Sometimes what we do quietly in the shadows becomes someone else's lighthouse. We may never know whose life we touch or how, but it matters all the same. I left the party that night feeling lighter than I had in years. Noah fell asleep in the car, still clutching his goodie bag, his head on my shoulder. I drove home through the dark streets, the ocean's black mirror on my right, and thought about how many of us carry old hurts waiting for someone to notice. Maybe I thought we don't need a room full of applause. Maybe all we need is one person to remember something kind we did and say it out loud. As I tucked Noah into bed, I kissed his forehead and whispered, "I'm proud of you." He blinked sleepily. "I'm proud of you too, Mom." That simple exchange felt like a balm, a closing of some ancient wound. I stood for a long time at his door, breathing in the quiet, letting it settle deep inside me. What I didn't know as I slipped into bed that night was that the ripple started by that dinner would reach much further than I could imagine. Old patterns don't break without resistance, and sometimes shining a light on the past is the very thing that stirs up the next big storm. But for now, I slept cradled by the hope that maybe, just maybe, change had finally begun. And when the sun rose, it brought with it a new set of questions, and the first steps toward a future I hadn't dared to dream. In the days after the party, I felt as if something inside me had quietly shifted. It wasn't dramatic, a grand confrontation, or some movie moment epiphany. It was softer, more like a bruise, turning to a scar. For the first time in years, I caught myself wondering what it might feel like to stop fading into the background. That feeling stayed with me as I went about my ordinary routines, packing Noah's lunches, sorting laundry, answering emails at my desk by the window, where the afternoon light slanted just so. It was during one of those afternoons, as the golden light warmed my kitchen, that I received a message from Daniel. He thanked me again for the stories I'd read to his sister all those years ago, for the comfort I'd brought to a frightened family. "You made a difference, Grace," he wrote. "It mattered." The words were simple, but they landed with surprising force. I stared at the screen for a long moment, tears prickling unexpectedly, before typing back, "Thank you. Sometimes I forget." That exchange opened a door I hadn't realized was closed. Over the next week, Daniel and I began to talk, first about his sister, then about our lives, our families, the places we'd come from. We didn't speak of Rachel or my mother, not at first. Instead, we spoke of ordinary things: favorite books, the best coffee in town, the magic of a Maine sunrise. Each conversation felt like sunlight on a cold day, a gentle reminder that connection could happen in the most unexpected places. One evening, Daniel asked if I wanted to meet for coffee. I hesitated, feeling the old nerves rise. But Noah, overhearing, grinned and said, "You should go, Mom. You deserve to have a friend." So I went. We met at a small cafe near the harbor, the kind with chipped mugs and the best blueberry muffins in town. Conversation flowed easily about Noah's obsession with the planets, Daniel's work with local charities, even our favorite childhood cartoons. It was the first time in a long while I felt like myself, not just a role or a responsibility, but a whole person. During that coffee, Daniel shared something that caught me off guard. He spoke of his sister's illness, not just the fear and the pain, but also the quiet moments of grace and laughter. She always said the world needs more people who show up and just sit with you, he said. Voice soft. You were that person for her, Grace. I swallowed hard, not sure what to say. No one had ever told me that my quiet presence was a gift. I'd always assumed it wasn't enough. But listening to Daniel, I realized that sometimes being present is the most anyone can give. In the weeks that followed, I found myself looking at the world with new eyes. I was still Grace, the steady one, the anchor. But I was also someone capable of forging new connections, of being seen and valued in ways I hadn't dared imagine. I started saying yes to small invitations: coffee with a neighbor, a weekend art class. With Noah, a stroll through the farmer's market on a sunny Saturday. With each new yes, the old script faded a little more, making space for something softer, braver, more real. It struck me then that so many of us move through life believing our value is measured in applause or achievement. But the truth is, our worth is found in the quiet ways we show up for others, the small kindnesses that ripple out long after we've forgotten them. Daniel's gratitude reminded me that none of us are truly invisible. Sometimes it just takes the right person to say, "I see you," for us to start believing it ourselves. I tried to pass that lesson on to Noah. One afternoon, after a rough day at school, he slumped at the table, frustrated over a lost soccer game. "Does it even matter?" he muttered. I knelt beside him and said, "It matters that you tried. It matters that you showed up for your team even when things got hard." He nodded slowly, and I saw a flicker of understanding, a seed planted for someday. We all need someone to believe in us, especially when we struggle to believe in ourselves. The healing, of course, wasn't instant. Old habits tugged at me, the urge to shrink, to apologize, to make myself small for the comfort of others. But each conversation with Daniel was a gentle push forward. Each time I let myself be seen, I felt a little lighter, a little more like the person my father believed I could be. There were still awkward moments at the grocery store, when I bumped into my mother at school events, where Rachel's name echoed down the hallway, but the difference was that now I knew I didn't have to disappear. As winter melted into spring and the town bloomed with daffodils and hope, I found myself daring to imagine more. More laughter, more friendships, more courage to take up space in my own life. For so long, I thought being strong meant being silent. But now I was learning that true strength is found in letting yourself be seen, in reaching for connection, even when it feels risky. By the time the next family gathering arrived, a birthday party for Rachel, bright with candles and champagne, I stepped into the room, not as the gray sister, but as someone learning to stand in her own light. I didn't have all the answers, but I had hope, and for the first time in a long while, that was more than enough. What I didn't realize was that the next chapter would challenge everything I'd learned about courage and what it means to finally claim your place at the table. Courage doesn't always arrive like a trumpet. Sometimes it grows quietly beneath the surface until one day it stands up and surprises you. The birthday party for Rachel was held at a glittering downtown restaurant, the kind with glass walls and white tablecloths. Noah wore his best shirt, his hair slicked back with a stubborn cowlick. I wore a dress I hadn't bought for anyone's approval, just something soft and blue, the color of the sea on a gentle morning. I told myself as we walked through the revolving doors that tonight I would stay true to who I was, no matter what unfolded. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter bouncing between walls, lined with photos of city landmarks. I recognized many faces, old friends of my mother's, Rachel's colleagues, people who seemed to know our family story without ever knowing our hearts. Daniel was there too, offering a supportive smile as I found my place near the far end of the table. Rachel, radiant in a white dress with sparkling earrings, held court at the center. Mom watched over it, all sharp-eyed, ready to smooth every detail. The meal began with toasts. Rachel's fiancé raised a glass, praising her achievements, her generosity, her warmth. One by one, friends shared stories: her resilience in college, her latest charity work. Each speech circled back to her brightness, as if the whole evening was a spotlight meant only for her. I tried to focus on Noah, who was quietly folding his napkin into the shape of a spaceship. Still, a small part of me wondered if anyone remembered I was there. Then it was Mom's turn. She rose, glass trembling slightly, and looked around the room. "Rachel has always made me proud," she began. "She's overcome every obstacle and brought so much joy to this family. She paused. Then her gaze flickered to me. Of course, we're grateful for everyone who supports her journey. There was a polite nod in my direction, nothing more. It stung a reminder of 1,000 similar moments, the kind that accumulate quietly until you can't ignore the weight of them anymore. And then Rachel, smiling sweetly, stood to give her own speech. She spoke about growing up with the best family support system, about lessons in determination. Then her tone changed, light teasing, but with an edge. I always knew Grace would keep everything running smoothly, she said. She's steady, dependable, maybe not the loudest, but always there, like a safety net you don't notice until you fall. Laughter rippled across the table, and someone joked about me being the family insurance policy. For a moment I froze. The old urge to smile and let it slide tugged at me. But then I saw Noah's face, his eyes darting between me and the room, confusion and hurt written across his features. I realized in that instant that staying silent didn't just cost me, it cost him too. Children learn not only from what we say, but from what we endure. If I let myself shrink now, what was I teaching him about his own worth? So I stood up. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. Rachel, I said I'm happy for you. Truly. But I hope someday we'll learn to celebrate one another, not by comparison, but by recognizing what makes each of us unique. Being steady isn't a flaw. It's what keeps families together when everything else falls apart. The table fell silent. I caught Daniel's eye. He nodded quietly, supportive. The moment passed in a blur. Rachel flushed, Mom looked stunned, and the conversation stumbled back to safer topics. But the air in the room had changed. I felt a strange mixture of fear and relief, as if I'd just broken through a surface I'd been trapped beneath for years. Later, as the party ended and Noah hugged me tight, I realized that courage wasn't about making a scene. It was about refusing to hide, about telling the truth, even when your voice wavers. On the drive home, Noah was quiet for a while. Then as we crossed the bridge where the river shimmered beneath city lights, he said softly, "I'm glad you spoke up, Mom." I smiled, tears pricking my eyes. "Me too," I whispered. "Sometimes you have to say what matters, even if it's hard." That was the lesson the night gave us. Standing up for yourself doesn't always change the world, but it can change how you see yourself, and that sometimes is enough to begin again. The party marked a turning point, not just in my relationship with Rachel and Mom, but in how I carried myself in every room that followed. I started to believe that being steady wasn't something to apologize for. It was a kind of quiet power, a gift that deserved its own kind of celebration. For the first time in a long while, I was ready to write my own story on my own terms. But breaking old patterns doesn't mean the road ahead is easy. In the weeks that followed, new challenges appeared, uncertainties at work, the shifting dynamic with Daniel, and fresh wounds at home, as Mom struggled to accept the change. Yet beneath it all, I felt a sense of freedom. The courage to speak up had given me something precious, the permission to choose what came next. And so, as summer crept in with long evenings and the scent of lilacs on the air, I found myself wondering what a life rebuilt in honesty and hope might look like. For the first time, I was ready to find out. Freedom, I learned, is quieter than you expect. It's not a parade or a lightning bolt. Sometimes, it's just the hush after you finally tell the truth, the peace that follows an honest word. After Rachel's birthday, everything felt different, though on the surface little had changed. The same bills waited on the counter, the same work deadlines loomed, and every morning the same sunlight spilled across my kitchen floor. But inside, I was growing new roots of my own choosing. For the first time in years, I let myself dream beyond survival. The urge to build something not just for Noah, but for myself grew stronger with each day. I'd always been good with numbers, always the one friends turned to for advice about taxes, budgets, or how to stretch a paycheck through the end of the month. One evening after Noah fell asleep, I spread out a stack of notebooks and drafted a plan. I'd open my own small business, a financial consulting service, for other single parents and families like mine. It wasn't an easy decision. Doubt crept in every night, whispering old fears. What if I failed? What if no one trusted me? What if my family rolled their eyes and called it another phase? But I pushed forward. I researched late into the night, filled out paperwork, called the city office for permits, and watched online tutorials about marketing and bookkeeping. I started small, helping a friend from church organize her bills, then took on another client, then two. Each time I helped someone, I felt a bit of the old weight lift from my shoulders. Of course, challenges came thick and fast. There were months when the rent nearly swallowed every dollar I earned, and weeks when I wondered if I was foolish for thinking I could build something on my own. I made mistakes, sent the wrong invoice, missed a networking event, forgot to print business cards for a local fair. Some days my confidence cracked, and the shadows of my old family roles crept back in. But each setback taught me something valuable. Resilience isn't about never falling. It's about getting up and trying again, even when no one's clapping. Through it all, Noah became my biggest cheerleader. He designed my first flyer with a drawing of a rocket ship saying, "You help people launch their dreams." Mom, when I worried about failing, he reminded me of the volcano we'd built together, the one that didn't work at first, but ended up being the highlight of the science fair after a few tweaks. Children, I realized, see possibility where adults see only risk. Mark, too, was a steady support. He encouraged me to join a local business group, introduced me to a friend who ran a neighborhood bakery, and celebrated every small win with coffee and homemade cookies. Sometimes, after a tough week, he'd take Noah and me to the harbor, where we'd watch the boats drift and talk about the future. Mark had been through storms of his own, and his quiet faith in me was a new kind of anchor, one I hadn't known I needed. The more I stepped outside the shadow of my old family script, the more I found my own community. Other parents started calling for advice. Soon I was running monthly workshops at the library, teaching budgeting basics and offering tips for building credit or saving for college. I saw my clients change not just their bank statements, but their confidence, their sense of control. It reminded me how much power there is in simply being seen and understood. One afternoon, as I locked up my tiny office, a single room above the bakery with a window overlooking the park, I found myself standing a little taller. I'd survived so much grief, disappointment, feeling small. But now I was building something real. Something that was mine alone. I wasn't waiting for approval from Mom or Rachel anymore. My validation came from the smiles of families I helped, from Noah's pride, from my own sense of accomplishment. If there's a lesson in this new chapter, it's that beginnings are almost always disguised as endings. Losing the old roles, the old approval had felt like stepping into thin air. But in that emptiness, I discovered room to breathe, to grow, to become more than the sum of my mistakes. I learned that self-made doesn't mean alone. It means choosing the people who lift you higher and letting go of those who only weigh you down. As autumn crept into the city, leaves swirling the sky sharp and blue, I realized how far I'd come. The journey wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't easy. But it was honest, and it was mine. For the first time, I was building a life, not out of fear, but out of hope. Of course, the past has a way of lingering. Family patterns don't disappear overnight, and every so often a comment from Mom or a text from Rachel would prick old wounds. But now those things no longer had the power to define me. I'd found my own light, and I was learning how to let it shine. Little did I know, as the first frost touched the window glass, that the hardest and most important steps of this journey were still to come. Because building a new life isn't just about moving forward. It's about learning how to close the door gently on what no longer fits, and finally saying yes to the future you've dared to imagine. Some endings come not with fireworks, but with a quiet, necessary breath. By the time my small business found its footing and autumn gave way to winter, I'd begun to notice how much lighter my days felt. I no longer woke up bracing for someone else's disappointment. The air in my apartment seemed clearer, my laughter more frequent, and ease that only comes when you finally set down a burden you carried too long. Then, as holidays approached, a letter arrived from my mother. Her handwriting was as familiar as ever, looping carefully across the page. She wrote, "Perhaps we could meet, maybe for Noah's sake." There was no apology, no admission of regret, just a tentative offer to re-enter my life on her terms. For years I would have rushed to reply, eager for even crumbs of reconciliation. This time I folded the letter gently and placed it in a drawer. I'd made peace with who I was. I didn't need permission to be proud of it. Rachel, for her part, was quieter now. Word of my business had spread. Families in town spoke well of the workshops, and sometimes former classmates would stop me in the grocery store to ask for advice. Rachel's voice on the family group text grew, distant updates about her practice less frequent, her tone less certain. Once she sent a message congratulating me on a community award. "You always were the practical one," she wrote, a faint echo of old roles, but also a hint of something new, respect maybe, or understanding. I answered with kindness and let it rest there, not reaching for more. Letting go of the need for closure from my family didn't come overnight. It took years of replaying old conversations in my mind, years of wishing for the perfect apology, the right words, the moment where everything would finally make sense. But what I discovered is that closure isn't a door someone else can open for you. It's something you choose for yourself, one gentle boundary at a time. I saw this truth reflected in small moments. At one of my Saturday budgeting classes, a young mother lingered after everyone else had gone. "My sister always made me feel like I couldn't get anything right," she confided. "Now I'm trying to build something just for me, but I keep waiting for her approval." I told her what I had learned sometimes the hard way. You don't need anyone's permission to build a good life, not even your family's, especially not if their approval costs you your peace. Her shoulders relaxed and she thanked me. I realized I was speaking as much to myself as to her. Of course, the invitations didn't stop. There were birthdays, holidays, the occasional family dinner. Sometimes I accepted, sometimes I didn't. When I did go, I set boundaries, arrived late, left early, and politely declined conversations that circled back to old comparisons or subtle digs. It wasn't always comfortable. There were moments I caught Rachel's eye across the table and wondered if she missed me, if she remembered the girls we'd once been, before all the roles and rules. But I no longer felt the urge to explain myself or to justify the shape my life had taken. If there's a lesson in this stage, it's that sometimes loving your family means loving yourself enough to say no. It means choosing honesty over obligation and protecting the space where your new life can grow. The greatest freedom is realizing you don't have to keep old wounds open just to prove you survived them. You can close the chapter quietly, without fanfare or approval. Noah too noticed the difference. One evening, as we decorated our slightly crooked Christmas tree, he asked, "Will Grandma come this year?" I smiled, tucking a homemade ornament onto a branch. "She might. And if she does, we'll welcome her. But if she doesn't, we'll still have a wonderful Christmas." He nodded, satisfied, and I saw how the lessons of the past about worth, about belonging, were slowly being rewritten for him too. As winter deepened, I realized closure wasn't an ending at all. It was an opening, a way to reclaim the story, to choose how much of the old pain you carried forward. I no longer needed apologies or explanations from anyone. I just needed to live in a way that felt honest, loving, and free. It's funny how once you make peace with your story, the world seems to open up around you. Old hurts lose their sting, new connections flourish, and the family you create by blood or by choice becomes your anchor and your sail. The rules you rewrite for yourself are the ones that last. Spring arrived with birdsong and hope, and as I watched Noah and Mark plant seeds in our little backyard, I understood at last the best kind of closure is not a locked door, but an open window. It's the quiet acceptance that what's gone is truly gone, and that what you're building now is stronger than anything you left behind. And as the days grew brighter, I found myself ready finally to step into the last chapter of this journey, the one where family means something you build, not just something you inherit. The best stories don't always end with grand reunions or perfect apologies. Sometimes their beauty lies in the small moments, the laughter at a dinner table. You set yourself the warmth of a hand. You chose to hold the certainty that your life belongs to you. As spring unfolded across Portland, I looked around my home and realized how far we'd come. Noah's drawings lined the fridge, Mark's gentle encouragement filled the kitchen, and sunlight pooled on the floor just like it always had. Only now I stood in its glow, not its shadow. Looking back, every part of my journey shaped this new chapter. I grew up in a family where roles were rigid, love came with conditions, and silence was often safer than honesty. Rachel was the golden child, I was the steady one, both of us trapped by scripts we never wrote. Losing my father changed everything. His absence left a hole, but also taught me the strength of gentleness and the power of simply being there for someone else. The pain of being overlooked was real, but so was the resilience it built inside me. There were seasons when I believed I'd never be more than second best, always helpful, always dependable, never quite worthy of the spotlight. But life has a way of nudging you toward new beginnings, often when you least expect it. facing old wounds at Rachel's engagement, finding the courage to speak up at her birthday, and finally daring to build a business for myself were all small revolutions that added up to something real. Each challenge brought lessons that being steady is a quiet kind of superpower, that kindness matters, and that sometimes you have to be your own rescue. The family I was born into will always be part of my story, but it's not the only chapter. I learned to set boundaries with my mother, to let go of needing closure from Rachel, and to forgive without inviting old pain back into my heart. Through these choices, I found space for new love for community and for the kind of life that grows strong at the broken places. Noah, watching all of this, learned too that worth isn't measured by applause, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply not give up on yourself. Now our days are stitched together with quiet joys, backyard picnics, business milestones, evenings spent watching the stars, and mornings when the hardest thing we face is which cereal to eat. There's freedom in building your own family, in choosing the people who lift you up, and celebrating every small victory. The legacy I want to leave for Noah and for anyone listening is this: you are not broken by what you endured. You are made stronger, kinder, and more real. If you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or told that your quiet strength doesn't matter, let this story be your reminder that you are not alone. We all have wounds. We all get to rewrite the rules. And sometimes the ones who change the world are the ones who were never handed a microphone in the first place. If this journey moved you, or if you see yourself in any piece of it, I hope you'll let us know in the comments below. Tell us where you're watching from and what part of Grace's story touched you most. Like and subscribe to join a community where every story matters, where every voice is welcome, and where we believe that healing and hope are worth sharing. Because here we celebrate the family you build and the quiet legacy you leave behind.